This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
It's another day at the office. Another day where I go into the Friday show trying to think of all these banger intros to do, and then I get the recording session going and I realize I did not pre-plan for this at all. But sometimes that's more fun than actually planning stuff out from the beginning. Gives me a chance to improv and come up with stuff to say on the fly. More often than not, it ends up tanking horribly. Kind of like how AEW's ratings are tanking horribly. Oh, sorry. That one was a low blow. I know. But I had to. It was too good to pass on. Oh, I assure you, we will get into that AEW show in a little while. I had a lot to say about that one they presented on Wednesday night. It's funny too, because looking back, it was a total nothing happening show, yet somehow when it was over, I just had the urge to want to rip that show apart more than usual. So obviously you all know, if you're watching for the first time, you can do all the subbing and the liking and the clicking and the dabbing and the swiping and whatever it is y'all do when you're trying to support people on social media these days. At least I know with YouTube, they still have the subscription and the like buttons. With Rumble, I still don't know what they call the equivalent to liking videos or following channels. I mean, I like Rumble in certain aspects, but they kind of need to upgrade their website at some point. It's giving me those Daily Motion vibes from back in the day. Been using it for a couple of years now, and it comes with its perks, but it's not the greatest video streaming platform site I've seen. But hey, they're doing the Lord's work. They're giving everybody alternatives to YouTube, which is kind of the direction I think a lot of people need to be heading these days. Anyway, well, I was going to mention the Elimination Chamber thing in the intro, but I think I might save that for the end of the show, because I kind of want to get through this Dynamite report so we can move on to the classic stuff. The classic material did not do a number on me like Dynamite did on Wednesday. And just so we're all on the same page about how clueless Tony Khan is when it comes to his mark booking mentality, take this week's opener as an example. Another tragic loss to the wrestling community this past week. Longtime promoter and wrestling legend Jerry Jarrett passed away on Tuesday. And, for anybody that's been living under a rock their entire life, you would know that he was the founder of the CWA based in Memphis, a longtime business partner with Jerry Lawler. He was also the co-founder of TNA alongside Jeff, which we try not to talk about. But all joking aside, this is a pretty big story. And in terms of where a guy like Jerry Jarrett falls in the pecking order of all-time greats, you have to at least acknowledge how instrumental he was to the industry, especially as a businessman. I think for the younger generation of fans, we're probably more mindful of Jeff's contributions to the business rather than his father's. Like, we know the name Jerry Jarrett, but for the people that didn't grow up watching Memphis wrestling or follow Jerry's backstory as a promoter, it's hard to really comprehend just how important he was to the business during his active years. And it's another sad loss, and one that I think a lot of people are going to be reflecting on for the next several months, especially as we kind of do cross-examination of how business used to be conducted versus how it is today. But that's a subject for another time. Getting back to this match, though, and how it relates to Tony just being completely inept as a booker, they have Jeff under contract. So, naturally, instead of having Jeff do a tribute match to his dad, just doing away with all the kayfabe nonsense for a change, because God forbid AEW ever strays away from exposing the business. No. Instead, they book Jeff in an 8-man tag match with Jay Lethal, their comedy manager Sanjay Dutt, and the Great Khali Bootleg. And for reasons that I am still trying to figure out to this point, they wrestled the acclaimed Billy Gunn, who I guess now they're just outright referring to as Daddy Ass. Part of me wonders if they actually have his ring name as that on their website, but I'm too lazy to look. And of course, because Tony is forever infatuated with this fucking asshat, yes, they had to throw the company mascot in there. And as soon as the mere sight of this jagoff appears on camera, all credibility immediately goes out the window for me. It doesn't matter who he's in the ring with working. It doesn't matter who's surrounding him at the time. It's the same stale act with this idiot. And Tony is just determined to beat this gimmick into the ground, well past its point of ROI. So already out of the gate, they've turned what could have potentially been a serious segment into a complete farce just by association of Orange Cassidy alone. And I'll even use his Christian name to make my point. And not just that, but by affiliating Jeff Jarrett with his faction of comedy dorks here, they've also established from the onset that he's going in as a heel. Which didn't make a lick of sense to me. I mean, yeah, the guy's been working as a heel on television, but again, AEW's already acknowledged the quiet part out loud, the fact that babyfaces and heels really don't exist in their company and everything's 50 shades of fucking gray all the time. So, I don't think the people would have thrown rocks at Tony for scrapping the whole Jeff Jarrett heel thing and just send him out there to work as a babyface to do a tribute match for his father. But, on the other hand, and I hate to even have to bring it up here, but let's call a spade a spade. Even when you factor in Jerry's death, the opportunity for them to just send Jeff out there on his own without the comedy heel reinforcement still wasn't going to be enough to rally the people behind Jeff. Anytime Jeff was on offense in this match, it was either 30% of the crowd just sitting on their hands, not really reacting, or the other 70% were chanting, "Jarrett sucks." Pretty vociferously, by the way. And again, was that par for the course because he was on the opposing team going up against a bunch of babyfaces? Maybe. Or was it the fact that, well, point blank, it's Jeff fucking Jarrett. And it's the same Jeff Jarrett that every single one of those AEW fans have PTSD from going back to his insufferable run in TNA over a decade ago. The same people that are watching AEW now, a lot of them watched TNA back in the day. So we have a lot of context. And I really hate being that guy. I really do. I've continually talked about my love-hate relationship with Jarrett over the years. But am I going to sit here and try to spin the crowd reception Jeff Jarrett was getting? No. Whether or not his dad died, it doesn't change the fact that it's not going to be enough to rally the fans behind Jeff. Because nobody wants to cheer Jeff. They never did. They didn't want to cheer him here. They didn't want to cheer him in TNA. They sure as fuck didn't want to cheer him in WCW. It's the hard, brutal truth, man. And if you don't like hearing it, TS. This was just kind of sad to watch, if I'm being honest. Because you think, it was their one opportunity to actually maybe try and milk a babyface reaction for Jeff, make him a sympathetic character on TV, maybe actually do something constructive like cut a promo, talk about his father's legacy. But not doing it from a heat-seeking standpoint, just trying to be a button-down, serious promoter's son. Instead, they thought it would be a wiser decision to send him out there to be part of the comedy act. And it blew chunks, as anyone with half a brain would have expected. The match was rotten. Even with guys like Lethal and Jarrett and Billy Gunn in there, even those guys couldn't cover up for the other steaming pile of turds surrounding them. And I'm not so much referring to Caster and Bowen so much as I'm referring to Sanjay and Kali 2.0. Like, Caster and Bowens were in a no-win situation. A victim of circumstance, better put. We all know what I think about that Satnam Singh dweeb. Like, he's been a complete waste of money since day one. And I still have no idea why he's around other than TBS execs placating to diversity and all the other corporate woke nonsense. And even Sanjay Dutt at this point is just, why? Why is he still there? Do we really need to watch Sanjay act like a goofball on camera? Don't we already get enough bad comedy acts on the show every week to begin with? When's the last time Sanjay actually wrestled a match on this show? Does anybody know? I thought he was retired. I'm not kidding you. There was a point in this match where they went, I think I counted in full, almost a full minute and a half, where guys were tagging in and out doing face-offs. No one ever touched or did anything physical for an entire 2 minutes. I think I wrote down the sequence as something like this. Satnam tagged in to face Caster, so Caster tagged out to Billy Gunn. Then Billy and Satnam did the big guy stare down for like 20 seconds. And then that goddamn worthless sack of shit Orange Cassidy tagged in so he could do more bad acting. So he stood toe-to-toe with Singh, which looked visually insulting. And then Singh turned around and blew him off so Sanjay could tag in, and he could do more of his shenanigans, which was equally as sucky as Cassidy's abysmal act. And then they did something which didn't involve wrestling, and I think Jeff tagged back in so he could face off with Billy Gunn again. And then by the time the Ass Boys actually showed up on stage to distract Billy, that's when Jeff finally cut him off. I'm not kidding, by the way. That was a thing that happened. They seriously almost went an entire 2 full minutes without anybody doing any form of wrestling. It was all just lame comedy and horribly contrived pre-planned angles. And it made me want to turn the show off in disgust right there and be done with it. I mean, at least they were smart enough to have the Acclaim get the pin, but Jesus H. Christ. This is how they're getting ready to set up the Acclaim for a title rematch at the pay-per-view? Spoiler for later on, but we'll get to it, because it's not that simple. It ever is with AEW. The finish was equally as ridiculous as the deal where guys kept tagging in and out but never actually touching. They had to do another dumb comedy spot where Bowens is holding Dutt's legs back so they can tease the scissor me timber spot. And they went through a cycle where Billy Gunn tried to do the second rope leg drop, but he got cut off. Then Cassidy had to come in so he could do all his foolish antics. He also got cut off. Finally, after Dutt's just practically laying flat on his back while Bowens is holding his legs over his head, not even trying to fight back at this point, probably because he realizes how incredibly fucking stupid this all is, Bowens finally goes up top and hits the scissor me timbers for the 3 count. I concluded my notes with, this was insufferable, pointless, and degrading. I would have tried to come up with more terms in the dictionary to use, but I ran out of time and just wanted to move on. Horrible. So following that absolute abomination, we were then rewarded for said abomination with another absolute abomination. This one I actually voluntarily chose not to watch because why would I? It's Jon Moxley and Claudio Castagnoli versus Rouge, and as I first wrote down in my notes, some guy, they threw a graphic up for him. I had no idea who he was. Turned out the random guy was actually Preston Vance, who I remember hearing the name at one point, but I couldn't figure out where I had heard it from or when it was ever mentioned. And of course, as soon as Excalibur starts name-dropping all the Dark Order shit, that's when I was like, oh yeah, no wonder I completely forgot about it. It's the fucking Dark Order. Who gives a shit? The problem, too, was the fact that when he was in the job order, I'm pretty sure he was wearing a mask like all the other outlaw dingbats. So then, for reasons that I don't think were ever explained on television, now he's out of the group. They took the mask off of him, and in typical AEW fashion, they just expect us to all know that he's Preston Vance now, no longer affiliated with the job order, and now he's part of Rouge's crew of random dudes that nobody gives a crap about. And we all know this because we've been watching Dark Elevation. Or something. Because we're all a bunch of mouth-breathing mole rats that consume every bit of AEW content that's perpetrated out there because we have nothing else going on in our lives, apparently. At least, that's the impression I get when I watch this stupid program every week. So, of course, I did not watch this. It's a tornado tag match, which already indicated to me that it was going to be garbage. They did all the usual suspect garbage wrestling you'd come to expect in a Jon Moxley match. Here, they actually had the balls to do the jump start and the crowd brawling, which went through a fucking commercial break. And when they come back, after the crowd brawling, after the plunder usage, after the jump starts, after random shit happening with rapid fire camera cuts, buildings tumbling over, ringside steps catching on fire, then they decided, after all that shit, now would be a good time to ring the bell to start the match. After about 5 straight minutes of ECW melee. And at that point, I skipped ahead to the finish after this thing went damn near 15 minutes, including commercial, and I saw Mox bleeding from the forehead. My final note reads, eat a dick. And then immediately after that match, Kip Sabian attacked Hangman Page in the back, who was watching the match on one of the monitors, in very typical WWE fashion, by the way, where instead of Page looking at the monitor like how normal people watch TV, he has to look at it from an angle so he can see his reaction. Whatever. His reaction, for the record, was blank. Just like all of Page's facial expressions ever read. Oh yeah, and why did Kip Sabian attack Hangman Page in the back? Well, you see, they were supposed to wrestle later in the program. Yeah, that was the extent of the logic. They just couldn't have Kip Sabian and Adam Page wrestle a match. They also had to shoot a completely pointless angle beforehand because, well, AEW logic, I guess. Now, to be fair, things did turn around for a little bit. So, Starting with the Wardlow Jim Ross sit down, where Wardlow kind of explained the backstory with the whole Warjo team. Well, explain the backstory, more so try to make a silk's purse out of a sow's ear. But I will at least credit them for trying, because I'm always running these people up the flagpole for never bothering to explain anything rationally. At least here, the story was easy to follow. When Joe and Wardlow were tag partners for all of about 7 minutes before Joe turned on him for no reason, Wardlow and Joe also shared some personal stories with one another. And in one of those stories, Wardlow had mentioned the story of his father, who he had grown up with until about the age of 8 before he left. And of course, the red pill analyst in me immediately thinks, probably more accurately, the wife divorced him and took sole custody because she was looking to reap the benefits of the divorce system. Regardless, Wardlow had caught up with his father when he was starting up wrestling, and he was able to make Wardlow's first independent show appearance. And not too long after that, it turns out that he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And when Wardlow actually got to see him again, he was already in hospice care. So when the doctors called him and told him about his death, Wardlow decided that he was going to grow his hair out and his beard to pay tribute to his father, with whom he reconciled with later on in life. And it was a nice, relatable, feel-good story. And when Wardlow talked about the angle where Joe cut off his ponytail on Dynamite, he mentioned how Joe stole Wardlow's identity from him, and now he's going to pay the price for it. Okay. Not the most natural, well-told story angle in the history of pro wrestling, but at least I can buy that as somewhat credible. I still don't think it'll wind up doing anything for Wardlow. You know, the people are still going to cheer Joe wildly over Wardlow. And, you know, I don't think a small 3-minute childhood story is going to help matters any, but call me a skeptic. We'll see what happens when they do the rematch. After that, we had Josh Woods versus the returning Mark Briscoe. After his several-week absence from television following the tribute match to his brother, turns out our genius Booker-in-Chief has already relegated him to Rampage, the embodiment of death TV in AEW. But hey, glad to see Tony could find a way to make some room for Mark Briscoe this week. I mean, after all, it is very challenging when you're trying to constantly wedge in 287 other absolute wastes of dreck on your program every week. You might not always have time to fit the actual stars on your show. Fucking Nimrod. I mean, it was a decent match. Take out all the nonsense with Mark Sterling, Tony Nese, Daivari, and the Lucha fucks early on, which happened for Christ knows why. I'm not even going to get into wondering why or how Josh Woods ended up with any of these guys. I remember Sterling and Nese were paired together doing some story stuff at one point. More bad underneath comedy. Now they got Arya, Daivari, and Josh Woods in the group too. Again, I assume we're all just expected to know what's going on. Obviously, I don't. So, of course, none of it's actually explained in any way. The actual wrestling between the two was inoffensive. I haven't seen a whole lot of Josh Woods' work before, but I mean, he's got a decent mean guy look. You know, Mark went over with the Froggy Bow elbow drop. That's really all there was to take away from it. Too much floor brawling, but I mean, I can dedicate an entire chapter of my Death of AEW book to the stupidity of crowd brawling and floor brawling in this fucking company, where the refs just stand around letting it all happen, or they take about 7 months to count to 10. I'd like to think Tony Khan has something else bigger in store for Mark Briscoe than just having him do underneath programs with guys no one cares about. I'm going to take full credit for me being way ahead of the curve with my comment that Mark Briscoe should be Ring of Honor World Champion at some point. I was one of the first to comment on how Tony has a rare opportunity being presented for him to take full advantage of Mark Briscoe's white-hot popularity. He needs to prioritize Mark Briscoe as a single star in 2023, and he needs to act on it soon. Good start would be by putting the ROH World title on him, even as early as when they kickstart their first set of Ring of Honor tapings, which I heard was a thing that's apparently going to be kickstarting soon. In fucking Universal Studios in Orlando, of all places. Which, man. Talk about your outdated TNA references from earlier. Hopefully that's only temporary. But, again, I want to stress the importance of Tony needing to capitalize on this while he still can. Because even someone like Mark Briscoe has a cap with how long the fans are willing to wait until they get fed up with it. If they don't make Mark Briscoe ROH World Champion by summer of 2023 at the absolute earliest, they may miss their window. And it wouldn't be the first time they've totally neutered or butchered their chance at getting over white-hot talents. One of them just did a pre-taped interview on this show, oddly enough. Y'all remember how over Wardlow was around this time last year when he was feuding with MJF? Then they totally dropped the ball with everything after the fact. A lot could happen in just a year's time span. Don't ever forget that. They still haven't completely recovered from the way Tony completely butchered Adam Cole's first run in AEW, immediately by putting him in lame underneath feuds with comedy characters. And granted, injuries kind of played a part in things too. But only now are they starting to try to rectify all the previous wrongs with what they did with Adam Cole, and God almighty, too little too late? You really wonder to yourself. Speaking of the Handsome Devil, he was in a sit-down with Renee Paquette, and, well, they really didn't say much. Cole talked about his recovery and how he's getting healthier every day. Said he's looking forward to getting back in the ring, and he says that there are particular guys that he's looking forward to doing business with. Didn't specify who. I can only hope to God it doesn't involve anybody from his camp of play school friends. Trust me, we've seen enough of Adam Cole's run with the Beta Bucks to last a lifetime. I think the common sense name that's going to get thrown around is Kenny Omega, which, no thanks. Not really interested in that. Maybe for all the elite fanatics and the most hardcore avid AEW watchers, yeah. Like Adam Cole versus Kenny Omega is probably a big deal to them on paper. For me, it's a hard pass. A one-way ticket to the commode. And that actually sucks because there are certain guys that I would really like to see Adam Cole actually work with at some point. And I'm talking actual programs or feuds. Like if he's going to be a babyface, the obvious pairing would be to eventually throw him into the world title equation with MJF. And if they play that up as serious and they don't involve any of the elite shenanigans in anything, that could be a great piece of business. Adam Cole is at his best when he's on his own and he's working a more stern role. So that could be a really fine program. And there are other names too that I could probably rattle off if I took the time to actually run down the roster. If Miro ever comes back, I could see a program with those two. Maybe Eddie Kingston coming back as a heel. Those guys could probably have some good promo battles together. I'd love to see him maybe work a program with Claudio down the road, as long as they don't involve Moxley. And I know technically the Blackpool guys are baby faces, but Claudio's also worked the heel side of the fence before, so there are ways to make that work, even if Claudio works a more tweener role as opposed to just going full-blown heel, even though I hate the term tweener, but you get what I'm trying to get at. Maybe Joe? Joe's an obvious giveaway now that he's a heel. I mentioned the elite and how he needs to stay as far away from those assholes as humanly possible. they need to make sure they keep him away from Jericho too. For the love of God, they need to keep Adam Cole away from Chris Jericho. That fucking heat-sucking vampire. I'm calling it now, dude. If they throw Adam Cole at Jericho, that is the end of Cole's run as we know it. If Cole starts to catch fire, you know Jericho is going to be the first to try to latch himself onto that. And it won't be long until it turns into a Ricky Starks situation where every week they keep him involved with the JAS, the more Ricky stock drops. But, this is all speculative until we actually see what they do with Cole when he gets back in the ring again. I'm interested to see who he faces off with at Revolution, if that's even the earliest they plan on getting him back in the ring. Guess we'll find out. After this, we had an appearance from our AEW World Champion Maxwell Jacob Friedman, who, as we learned at the beginning of the show, was contractually obligated to be on this week's show. As opposed to the other shows where he sporadically appears, be it in pre-tapes or random cameos. But apparently Tony put his foot down this week and said, no, MJF must appear in person in Laredo, Texas, of all places. This was a very weird segment. It starts with MJF doing a Heat promo. He's running down the idea that everyone likes to validate the moniker of being the best in the world, but the truth of the matter is that the only thing that matters in wrestling is who's on top and who's the world champion. He notes that smart guys like MJF got into the business to win championships and make a lot of money. He didn't do this because he wanted to put on 5-star matches and be a tool to all the marks on the dirt sheets. And while he's putting over the fact that he's going to run the gauntlet with Danielson at the Revolution and still come out on top, he then brings out Christopher Daniels, of all people, to basically dress MJF up as being better than Danielson. Now, it should be noted first, I like Chris Daniels. I've been a big fan of his for ages. Never had a bad word to say about the guy. But in all honesty, when was the last time Christopher Daniels was even mentioned on the show, much less seen in person? Months? It's got to be by now. With the way this roster rotation works, poor fucker's eye still hasn't fully healed after he got potatoed in the face from the Beta Bucks in that match from 2 years ago. So he comes out to acknowledge the fact that MJF paid him a lot of money to come out here and suck his dick, but it's not worth it for Daniels to ruin his reputation just to prop up MJF. So he basically tells Max that Danielson is going to run circles around him at the pay-per-view and leave as the world champion. And finally, it all boils over to where MJF smacks the microphone out of Daniels' hand. They kind of have a verbal altercation until Daniels tries to turn around and leave. And when MJF goes to spin him around, Daniels slaps him across the face. MJF winds up cold cocking Daniels in the gonads, put him in the Fujiwara armbar, and then Danielson eventually ran out from the back to send MJF packing. And it wasn't a bad segment or anything. I get that Chris Daniels and Bryan Danielson have ties from their work together from the old Ring of Honor days, but again, I think it's one of those conditions where we, the audience, are just kind of expected to know those guys had history, which is why Chris wasn't willing to go out there to throw Danielson under the bus at the expense of MJF giving him a payout. But I go back to my main issue with all of it. When was the last time we saw Daniels on television? And all of a sudden, they just felt the need to throw him out here so MJF could get some heat on him? Fine. I guess. Would have maybe behooved of them to at least show a video package of Danielson working some matches with Chris Daniels so we could get the full context. Daniels mentioning on the mic is one thing, but without the visual aid, it's kind of hard to care. At the very least, too, if you knew that you were going to have Daniels do something with these guys at some point, why not have Daniels appear in one or two of the backstage segments? Like, what about the deal where Danielson was in the trainer's room that one week and Doc Sampson and Takesha were with him at the time and they were kind of examining his shoulder? Why not throw Christopher Daniels in there for a cameo? At least that way it would have validated him coming out here to maybe, throw some shade at MJF for what he did. But no, it's just, oh, hey, Chris Daniels is here. Let's have him go out there to do a segment because you all know that they have history, right? Right? I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying to nitpick for the sake of nitpicking, but I really didn't get much out of this segment. And that's kind of bad because MJF is usually the best part of the show every week. And even his deal didn't hit a home run this week. But following that, we had Jungle Boy versus Brian Cage. And I don't think it takes more than 2 seconds to get a general consensus on how that went. I'll give you a hint. It sucked. Jungle Boy is a lost cause at this point. They've completely buried that guy into oblivion. And Brian Cage is Brian Cage. He does a bunch of sloppy video game looking moves. All of his shit looks ghetto as fuck. And by the time it's over, they got Jungle Boy stacking up Cage and pinning him clean by trapping him in a roll-up, which looks visually ridiculous. The 180-pound guy being able to power down the 260-plus pound guy in a cradle pin. And Cage wasn't strong enough to kick out. Really? I don't buy it. But the afterbirth is where the real bulk of the conversation comes into play. In the feud that just won't die, the Jungle Boy Christian Cage thing is still going on, apparently. The last we saw of Christian, Christ, I can't even remember the last time we saw him now that I think of it. I remember there was a cage match with Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus at one of the pay-per-views, and that was the last I ever recall of seeing either Christian or the dinosaur before they both completely vanished. The dinosaur was still MIA from the equation here, so I don't really know what's going on there. TBA, maybe he's injured. But Christian's back, and at first, he came out still sporting the arm in the sling. He ended up macing Jungle Boy at the top of the ramp, and in very undersold delivery from these numbnut commentators, instead of trying to over-exaggerate the story of Christian revealing that his arm was perfectly fine the whole time, when Christian finally does the big reveal that he was selling the arm the whole time, the announcers are just like, oh yeah, look at that. Christian was feigning the injury the entire time. What a heel. Ain't wrestling silly sometimes, folks? Did I ever mention how much I loathe these commentators? Maybe a time or two. So I guess we have that eventual blow-off to look forward to. Finally. After it was randomly dropped several months ago for no discernible reason, and we've been given zero reason to care about it since. I thought Jungle Boy was doing the tag team thing with Hook, but nah, I guess Tony decided that wasn't getting over, so now it's just not a thing anymore. It just completely dropped it. Because Tony Khan books well in advance, as we all know. He knows exactly how he's going to get from point A to point B to point C and so on. Yeah. And I've got a fucking yacht to sell you in Palm Beach. Give me a break. Following that, we had the announcement from Renee Paquette, fresh off the Guns winning the AEW World Tag Titles last week. Now we come to find out that at Revolution, the first title defense will not apparently be a strict one-on-one rematch with the Acclaimed, which would make too much sense, I guess. No, instead, it is now going to be a fatal four-way with two completely random teams that are going to be shuffled into the equation, and those will be decided after they host two completely random qualifying matches with a bunch of other completely random underneath job teams that nobody cares about or takes seriously. More than likely because FTR will not be factored into the equation. And even if they are, why would anybody want to pay money to see Dax and Cash get shoehorned into a meaningless multi-man tag match with three other teams? The whole thing's retarded, but that's kind of straight up Tony Khan's alley of booking. So why am I not surprised? Let's cram in as many bodies as we possibly can. Every match has got to be a goddamn multi-person clusterfuck. Seriously. The Guns' first title defense since winning the straps a week ago. And they're being advertised for a completely unnecessary multi-person tag defense at the pay-per-view. More than likely so they can retain an arbitrary, underhanded fashion where they steal the win or something stupid. Because WWE does that shit all the time, so naturally AEW is going to copy it verbatim. And all the AEW shills will sit there and praise it till kingdom come because they're fucking spineless sheep. And you watch. That's exactly how they're going to book that finish at the pay-per-view. The Guns are going to hide on the outside. They're not going to do any of the work. And then right at the end, they're going to come in and steal the win. Because that's every multi-man finish in every match you've seen in the last decade. It's like, let's play the game of how unoriginal can we get with all this booking. Oh my God. But there's more to come. And more reasons for Tony to keep trying to justify long-term contracts. Guess he needed to find an excuse to give Kip Sabian a payday. Forgot all about that guy. Brings me back to the good old days of AEW Dynamite circa 2019, early 2020, when this guy was prostrated on this show more than Orange Cassidy was. I still can't believe this idiot's still around. And what is his gimmick, by the way? He has guyliner on now? So he's a suspect sissy? Doesn't AEW have enough of those guys? Whatever. His blonde girlfriend's still around. I completely forgot what her name was. Doesn't matter. Anyway, he had his match with Adam Page. You remember when Adam Page got jumped in the back earlier? Came out for this match, perfectly fine. No wear and tear at all. Just a normal match. Like that entire backstage segment was completely pointless to begin with. And while this was going on, I kept wondering to myself, how badly did this actually tank in the ratings? I predict somewhere in the ballpark of low 800,000 in viewership. But we'll see. Page won with the Deadeye. Kip Sabian still sucks. I have nothing else to add. Nor do I have anything to add about them booking a Texas death match with him and Moxley at the pay-per-view. That's Adam Page and Moxley, not Kip Sabian and Moxley. I should have specified that. Speaking of go-nowhere feuds that won't die and contribute absolutely nothing to the overall bottom line of the show, this fucking Jon Moxley Adam Page thing is still going on. Good God in heaven. Will it end? No, it won't. Just wake me up when it's over. Just... whatever. I give up. I'm just trying to blow through this thing at this point. This show sucked a dick. Sucked a dick. All right. Ricky Starks is wrestling Daniel Garcia on Rampage. Nobody cares. Just nothing to comment on with that. Other than me laughing at the idea of people still wondering how Rampage is barely cracking 400,000 viewers most weeks at this point, gee, I wonder. Ricky Starks, wrestling one of Jericho's underneath lackeys on the B show. How could that not sell tickets? And speaking of things I have nothing to further comment on, the main event for this week was a girls' three-way. And honestly, you had me at girls' match. You could have stopped the conversation right there. I would have said, okay, cool, good enough for me. But as soon as you throw in the word three-way, that's all it takes for me to tap out and say, no thanks, I'm good. For those that care, it was Toni Storm, Britt Baker, and Ruby Riott. Why? I don't know. I don't know who's on what side, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, or who's on what affiliated party. I mentioned it last week. I think Paige and Toni are heels. Britt, I believe, is back to being a babyface again, at least in the short term before she eventually turns on Jamie Hayter, who I also forgot was the women's world champion still. And Ruby, I don't even know what her deal is at this point. I caught the tail end of the match where all the girls were getting involved on the floor, up to and including the ones that I don't believe were actually part of the match. And then Ruby somehow rolled up Britt Baker and pinned her. And yeah, this looked like it about sucked. And again, I'm calling into question anybody that tries to justify the idea that Toni strategically books or oversees anything on the show from week to week. Case in point, anything in the girls' division. Let's do some analysis for a second here. I'm not going to spend too much time harping on this, but I just want to sort of paint a picture in your head here. Paige signed with the company in, what, October of last year? Here she is in February of 2023. Just another gal that's part of the act. She's a friggin' supporting character in all this. Britt Baker's been stale forever. I've long since given up trying to care about anything involving Ruby or Toni. And again, I repeat, Jamie Hayter, the women's world fucking champion in all this. Just a bit player. She's hanging out at ringside like a random job talent. Just part of the lumberjack crew. The peanut gallery, if you will. And then they're doing whatever in the hell else is going on with all this other story crap. Is there even a women's match being booked for the Revolution card? If so, I failed to see how any of this ended up building to anything. Who's getting the title shot? Is it Ruby? Is it Britt? Is it Toni? I don't know. You know, they've been teasing the Baker Hayter thing for so long, I can't imagine people will actually wind up giving a shit when it finally pays off. Meanwhile, the other girls, I just don't care at this point. I don't care. They've wasted Paige, Soraya, whatever her fucking name is now. Who cares? Ruby's been wasted since day one. Toni Storm, same deal. Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Toni Storm the women's champion at one point? Who beat her for the belt? Was it Jamie that beat her for the belt? Oh my God. It's a disaster area. And everybody else is just along for the ride. And yet we still wonder why every week the women's segments just turn viewers off. One by one. Just people mentally checking out. And these numbnuts decided, hey, here's a smart idea. Let's main event the women on the show. People probably already tuned the show out by now anyway, so why not? Yeah, if this segment didn't die a death in the ratings, I'll be shocked. I'm thinking like ballpark low 700s in viewership, low 107,000, maybe even pushing high six figures. I can't imagine people stuck around to watch this. Even the most loyal, diehard AEW sheep, I even think they had a threshold for pain. What a garbage episode. I don't know what to say. This show, by and large, sucked. More than usual. Absolutely wretched. This one was up there with like 2019, 2020 levels of bad AEW programming. And while I know this might come as a shock to a lot of you watching, you know there's a pay-per-view in like 2 weeks, right? As of now, we know... Well, what do we know? Okay, we know MJF and Danielson in the Iron Man match is happening. That one's kind of been facilitated for a while. They just announced it last week, but the writing was on the wall there. We now have Moxley and Page in a Texas death match because Fall's got to find an excuse for Mox to do his garbage hardcore stuff. He's probably going to bleed like a faucet and it's going to suck. We've got whatever jumbled mess is going on with the tag title situation, and I think that's it, right? 2.5 matches announced for the pay-per-view card, one of which we only know 50% of the participants. And right now, I'm looking about as forward to seeing this show as I am when I go in for my 6-month dentist appointment checkups. The buzz for the show is almost non-existent. And in typical AEW fashion, they're probably going to wait until the go-home show to announce like 11 other matches, which will probably mean the show winds up going until 1 a.m. And in that case, I'll be even more pissed off. What do you even say at this point? It's AEW. We're in February of 2023, and nothing at all has changed with this company. It's still the same steaming pile of turd that we've come to expect. All right. I actually had to pause the recording so I could go fill up my water. That Dynamite show did a number on me. My voice was getting kind of raspy a little bit there. And we all know we got the retro portion of the podcast to do, so I want to give myself enough leeway. So as we shift over to the retro part of the Friday podcast, this is the NWA World Championship Wrestling episode from February 14th, 1987, better known to some as Valentine's Day. And what a Valentine's Day special it was. 'Tis the season of love and widespread cheer for all the happy couples in the world. So naturally, in the world of pro wrestling, circa 1987, NWA's opening VTR for the show is a replay of a Sunday night special where Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch turned on Nikita and Dusty and laid them out on behalf of the Russians. Because that'll get people in a jolly Valentine's Day mood. Heel turns. The good stuff. And not just any heel turn, mind you, but turning and siding with Ivan Koloff, Vladimir Pietrov, and whoever the faked masked Russian jobber was that was part of that 6-man. Guess it wasn't all that important in the end. Nikita killed him. But yes, that is indeed what they opened with for this week's Saturday night episode. And there will be a little more to cover regarding the Dick Murdoch story later on, but I did want to take the opportunity to say before I forget, I have been actively vocal about how directionless and hollow the entire Dick Murdoch run has been in the NWA up to this point. You almost had to think in the back of your head at some point, they got to turn this guy heel or something, because his story direction on this show in the last 5 months has been ass. They've done nothing with him. He's been spinning his wheels with no direction. So finally, it all comes to a head here. On a random episode of NWA Pro, they finally decided, yeah, this Vladimir Pietrov thing ain't working. So let's throw Captain Redneck into the equation and see if he can turn this turd stew into chicken soup. Again, we'll talk about it more later on. Going back to the studio here, and we were back in Atlanta for this week's episode of Studio Tapings. Last week was their Super Towns on the Superstation special, where they took us around to all the various cities across the country and showed us some highlights of all the house show matches. It was a nice change of pace compared to what we normally see in the studio, but this one was kind of back to the status quo. So Tony brought out Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham for a chat, and they really didn't have a whole ton to say. Windham gave a shout-out to the Senior Memorial Crockett Cup, mentioned that he and Ronnie were looking to get slated as the number 1 seed. Meanwhile, Garvin mentioned that he and Windham are not satisfied with just the U.S. tag titles. They want all the gold, up to and including Ric Flair's World Heavyweight Championship. And if you're patient enough to sit this one out for the next 7 or 8 months, you are going to get a payoff to the Flair-Garvin program. They've been teasing that one for a while. From there, we went to the ring for Jimmy Valiant versus Tommy Angel, because it is Valentine's Day after all. Got to find a way to get the Boogie Woogie Man on the show to let us all know that he loves us all, Daddy. Up to and including Tony Schiavone, who, I swear, always sounds comically uncomfortable when acknowledging Valiant being creepy toward him on camera. In any case, Valiant did some shucking and jiving, some hair pulling and eye gouging, and then eventually won with the elbow drop. At which point, we cut back over to the booth with the Midnight Express. You got Cornette, you got Bubba, you got Dennis, and you got Bobby Eaton's mustard ketchup-inspired ring trunks. I think those are the exact same tights he wore during the LA Scaffold match with the Road Warriors that we talked about last week. I even made a joke about how Bobby made a conscious decision to wear yellow trunks in that match. Getting back to this, though, Corny joked about how Eaton and Condrey were the real U.S. Tag Team Champions, because in order to be the champions, they have to be held by men. He then brought up the fact that approximately 2 years ago, Ronnie Garvin was walking around dressed in drag, portraying Miss Atlanta Lively, a gimmick that I thought I had effectively wiped from memory because it was so bad. So, of course, Cornette had to relive that tragedy, and it will forever be ingrained in my memory. The fact that one of the first programs they booked for the Midnight Express and Crockett Promotions when they came in '85 was them going up against Jimmy Valiant and Ronnie Garvin dressed as a woman. You can't win them all, I guess. So, of course, Cornette remarks that Ronnie is not only a liar, a backstabber, and a yellow belly coward, but that he also enjoys being a transvestite in his leisure time. And I'm not entirely sure if I'm even allowed to say that word on YouTube, but no, whatever. Fuck it. It's not like I'm monetized anyway. They want to give me shit for it, they can go piss up a hot rope. But let it be known, at one point it was politically correct to use that term on television. Times change. Anyway, Corny kind of rambled on for another minute here about what the Midnights were going to do to Garvin so that he never wants to show his miserable face in the wrestling business again. Also being sure to mention that in addition to not liking Garvin for being a disreputable human being, he also hates the fact that he enjoys cross-dressing. I don't know why, I just found that particular line funny. Then we came back from commercial with the returning Bullet Bob out at the booth. And this was one of those promo segments where Bob was trying to rapidly cover about 17 talking points at a given time. All the while, I'm totally distracted by the fact that someone did not cue Bullet Bob into making sure that he was making eye contact with the correct camera. So he starts by talking into the wide shot, and as soon as they cut to the close-up frame, Bullet Bob is still looking at the first camera, and he cuts this promo for like 2 straight minutes, sort of eyeballing back and forth between the close-up and the wide shot, totally has no idea where he's supposed to be looking at. And it was funny. He mentioned something about the Crockett Cup, something about Dick and Murdoch, and that's all I got. Not one of Bullet Bob's better promos. Then we had Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham going up against Randy Barber and Jack Jackson. Apparently when Jackson was coming up with his ring name, couldn't think of another first name to use, so he just went with the obvious. I actually think it would have been great if they would have just gone with the first name Jack and last name Son. Jack Son. Garvin was apparently gravely offended by this ring name as well, so he went in there to slap the shit out of this jabroni. So much so that Jackson started to form visible welts on his chest and upper back. Meanwhile, Crockett is at the booth marking out, going, "Oh yeah, cave his chest in." Probably my favorite spot in the whole thing was the part where after Garvin and Windham are just trading tags and slapping the ever-loving crap out of these guys, Garvin goes to whip Barber off the ropes and ends up grabbing him by the nose and then forcibly shoving him down to the ring mat. He's like, "I've got a great idea for a spot. I'm going to Irish whip the guy, and then I'm going to grab his nose, and then I'm going to squeeze him for a while." And I will confess, if there is one guy in the wrestling business that I don't think I would enjoy having grab my nose, it's Ron Garvin. I will take a slap to the chest before I ever let Garvin squeeze my nose as hard as he possibly can. My face would look like a deflated volleyball by the time he got done with me. Anyway, what were we talking about here? Oh yeah, Garvin and Windham killing 2 job geeks. Yeah, Garvin won with the knockout punch. And then coming back from commercial, here's where we got a little more insight on the Dick Murdoch heel turn. Tony and David set it up by talking about the history between Dusty and Murdoch, that they go back as longtime friends, and this was such an unforeseen turn of events because nobody ever expected this. So they take us to the 6-man, and we already kind of covered this in the opening teaser. Nikita beat one of the unnamed masked Russian jobbers, and when Ivan and Pietrov got in the ring, that is when Murdoch turned and kneed Nikita in the spine. And while the 3-on-2 beatdown is going on, it is totally obvious that Pietrov has no idea what he's supposed to be doing out there. Looks like a total fish out of water. So while Murdoch is stomping away and beating up Nikita and Dusty, he's also trying to surreptitiously direct Pietrov into the right place. He's grabbing him by the arm. He's shoving him out of the way, trying to pull him over into the right spot. I'm just laughing to myself as this is all going on. And it all ends with Pietrov giving Nikita a horribly botched second rope Russian sickle, where he basically just came down and sort of fell on Nikita's whole body. And Nikita just kind of took a bump and laid there. I rewound it and watched it several times over, laughing to myself. And finally, some of the other baby faces cleared out from the back to run off the heels, including Baron Von Raschke in a V-neck sweater and camel-colored Chelsea boots. Not what I was expecting the Baron to be choosing for casual apparel. That was also funny. And as far as the explanation goes for why Murdoch turned on his longtime friend Dusty, why he aligned himself with the Russians, the short and sweet of it is, Murdoch was pissed that Dusty handpicked Nikita Koloff as a tag partner after the Magnum TA car accident, after all the horrible shit that Nikita said about the United States for months and months, and all of a sudden Dusty was perfectly fine in taking Nikita under his wing. It was sickening for Murdoch to see that occur, and he kept his mouth shut for long enough. And even though he doesn't like Ivan and or agree with the Russian morals, he and Ivan now share one common goal, and they agreed to work together to rid Dusty from the NWA. And while Murdoch is firing off on this Heat promo. Dusty comes out to try and confront him again at ringside. And, well, that goes about as well as one might expect. The Russians then proceed to beat the shit out of Dusty a second time. Murdoch lays Dusty out with a chain, and when they go to throw Dusty into the ring again so Murdoch can try to hit him with a brain buster, here come Windham and Armstrong for a second time to make the save. Meanwhile, all poor Dusty wanted was a valid explanation for why Murdoch did what he did. And, well, there's two ways to go about analyzing this. There's the smart fan analytical version of the story where you look at how all of this came together and you think this was kind of their way for covering up the fact that Vladimir Pietrov just wasn't working and they needed a Crusher Darso 2.0 replacement now that he was gone and out of the picture. And then there's the regular standard wrestling fan circa 1987 that probably thought, no good Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch turning his back on Dusty, all because he was jealous that Dusty chose Nikita as a partner instead of him. What a whiny, petulant bitch. So it goes both ways. For me, I still tend to think that this was kind of a last-minute decision to try and give Murdoch something to do because of how creatively directionless he was. But it also makes perfect logical sense when you put it into kayfabe and try to apply it to the storytelling aspect of things. I could totally buy the artificial idea that Dick Murdoch was jealous that Dusty sold out for Nikita. Because, in a way, it's very much true that Nikita spent the entirety of 1986 talking shit on America, belittling the country, attacking all the baby faces with Ivan and Crusher every week. And then, out of the blue, after the Magnum car accident, here's Nikita siding with Dusty and turning babyface from virtually out of nowhere. So, even if you want to disagree with Murdoch's motive, you can definitely see why he did what he did. You can justify why he was reasonably angry. Now, I'll say this too. I have absolutely no recollection of Murdoch's affiliation with Ivan Koloff and Vladimir Pietrov. So, whatever they wind up doing with this whole Russian coalition thing on television, a lot of it I'm probably going to be recollecting for the first time because I have no memory of this ever happening. It does make sense when you factor in that Crusher had left for the WWF by this point and Ivan was in there trying to carry Vladimir Pietrov by himself. You know, they turned on the Baron last year. Nikita was babyface now, so they definitely needed something to give the Russians some credibility. So why not Captain Redneck? Let's see where it goes. That was followed with a great Tully Blanchard promo, beginning by him going out of his way to mock the fact that Dusty's made himself more enemies. Because as we know, with watching these Crockett shows, anytime Tully gets the opportunity to throw Dusty under the bus, he will not hesitate. But he turns things over to talking about good old Flexi Lexi, saying that he and Luger were at the gym the other day, and Tully watched Luger bench press 650 pounds. Weight that Hawk and Animal only dreamed they could ever bench press. And while he's putting over Luger as the Horsemen's newest affiliate acquisition, he gets JJ's nod of approval in the ring as he puts over that if anybody wants a fair fight with the Horsemen, be it 4-on-4, 3-on-3, 2-on-2, doesn't matter, the Horsemen have the ring ability, sharpness, skill, and brain power to outmatch anybody that gets in the ring with them. At which point, he tells Luger to make an example out of his opponent, who turned out to be Kent Glover. And of course, the biggest pop for the entire segment comes when Luger simply removes the robe. And all the girls immediately cream themselves. This match was particularly notable, not so much for anything Luger and Glover did here, more so just listening to the way the fans were reacting to him. I've talked about this before. It is not a newfound concept that in Crockett Promotions in '87, the Horsemen were pretty much getting split reactions everywhere they went. more often than not, it was more like a 60-40 split in favor of them. And you've got all these studio fans, men and women, passionately and loudly chanting for Lex Luger almost the entire time. To the point where David Crockett had to even mention that the Horsemen do have fans. There was just no way he could attempt to hide any of it. One of my favorite moments here was the spot where Luger whipped Glover off the ropes and he got him up for a bear hug. And he got one of the fans in the crowd going, he calls that the Luger lock. And some of the people upon hearing this begin chuckling and audibly reciting Luger lock. That was very funny. Not just the idea that NWA fans in 1987 were markishly trying to come up with moves for the heels on television, and of all the names for them to come up with, some geek decided to go with Luger lock. Because that's 80s and 90s pro wrestling for you. You take a guy's name and you use the word lock, slam, bomb, or some combination of those words, and that's their finishing move. We actually saw it more often in the WWF. But eventually, he settled on getting the win with his signature torture rack. Although I think they missed the boat by giving Luger a secondary submission move that he could have called the Luger lock. Good stuff. Then coming back from break, we had Tully, JJ, and Luger out. Of course, Tully's putting Luger over again and talking about what a remarkable specimen he is. JJ started bringing up a story about a little elderly woman in Pennsylvania who wrote in to Crockett over the week and talked about how excited she gets when she sees the Horsemen on television. He then began comparing Crockett Promotions to the Titanic, which was a very odd comparison, admittedly so. Also a very bad omen as to how things would eventually go in about a year's time once the Turner sale finally went through. Because we are coming up on that. Don't leave that out of memory. And then Luger chimed in, joked about how the Road Warriors are off at the gym training to try to get to half the size he is right now. He drew some analogies about what it's like to be a horseman, including something about living at the top of the floor at a penthouse, looking down at everybody else beneath them. The rest of it was barely audible because Luger was visibly blown up trying to talk. And much like the previous promo where Tully was at the booth putting over Luger, getting ready for a competition in the ring, they also did the same here for Arn Anderson, who was already in the ring getting ready to work a match. He took on Zane Smith, and once again, a situation where Arn Anderson, the heel, is in there pounding away and wiping the ring mat with his job guy, doing everything possible to get heat from the crowd. And while Arn is in there trying to be the most hated man in the history of pro wrestling, making snide remarks at the fans, saying everyone wants to be a horseman. Of course, the fans respond to this by cheering Arn and saying, "Yeah, horseman, yeah!" It's also funny hearing Tony Schiavone acknowledge spots where Arn is working over Zayn in an armbar. And right at the point he goes, clearly Zane Smith does not want to give up here. There's one fan in the audience that goes, "Give up!" I think there was also a point earlier where Schiavone acknowledges that Arn could easily put the match away with a gourd buster if he wanted to. And I think that was the same fan that just went, "Gourd buster!" I laughed at that. Arn did end up going over with the gourd buster, because that is exactly what the heel normally does in wrestling. He makes sure he gives the fans exactly what they want, just like all the bad guys do. From there, we cut to the booth for an interview with Bobby Jaggers and Dirty Dutch. Speaking of talents that I totally forgot about and have been completely directionless for months on this show, I saw these two on camera and my first thought was, oh, they're still around, eh? Well, in any case, Dutch started off by acknowledging Murdoch's heel turn and stating that he's known Murdoch for a long time. He never had a lot of friends to begin with, but the one constant was that he always stuck by Dusty's side. He cannot wrap his head around why Murdoch did what he did, but it's a damn shame to see it happen. Then he put over the Senior Memorial Crockett Cup 2-night tournament in Baltimore, promised that once he and Bobby won the $1 million payout, he was then going to immediately retire in the Bahamas. Which I know was probably a total throwaway line from Dutch, but that was a good line. Just imagine for a minute the idea of Dirty Dutch Mantel in the Bahamas, topless, laying on a lawn chair, getting tanned, possibly with those little cucumber layers over his eyes, shielding his face. Ugh. Now that I just put the vulgar image in your mind of a topless Dirty Dutch Mantel, I apologize for the oncoming nightmares. And then Bobby Jaggers talked for a minute. He was the first on the show to actually acknowledge that it was Valentine's Day. He wanted to take the opportunity to recognize 3 beautiful women in his life: his daughter and his wife. Must have been a graduate of the Steiner School of Math. He also put over the Crockett Cup and promised that he and Dutch were going to come out on top. Back from break, we had Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus Dave Isley. They wrestled for several minutes, actually going through a commercial. Garvin slammed and beat the shit out of the guy the entire time. Ended up going over with the brainbuster. I literally wrote nothing else down about it. Then we had Ric Flair out for a promo, here to do the Ric Flair thing, as I directly noted. Dressing up all the horsemen, cracking jokes about all the locker room baby faces, including him talking about how a guy like Luger can pull off the full suit look. Meanwhile, you put Nikita Koloff in a suit, and you'd be ashamed to even let the guy out of the house. He takes a few minutes to put over a bunch of celebrity names, most of which went in one ear and out the other. The only name I got out of it was Deborah Shelton, and that's only because I feel like Flair mentions her name at least once every time he cuts a fucking promo. And he puts over that the Horsemen are not your average standard blue-collar workers. They're alligator shoe wearing, custom suit wearing, Rolex watch sporting, girl magnet men. Saying that the Space Mountain auditions at the Marriott are in full effect, just as long as the girls are between ages 18 to 28 and single. And admittedly, if I had to copy and paste this Ric Flair promo with every Flair promo on the Studio Network in the last 2 years, guaranteed he would have covered pretty much all of his regular talking points. Did not hear him mention anything about limousines, but I think everything else was about covered. All the while, Tony is there doing his best to keep a somewhat straight face, utterly failing in the process. And albeit, I don't think I would have ever been able to keep a straight face during a Ric Flair interview in 1987. I definitely know for a fact I would not have been able to keep a straight face when Ric Flair was doing promos in 1997, much less 87. By 97, he had totally gone off the rails. I can't remember, which year was it that he was doing that rambling promo on Bischoff and he cuffed himself to the ring ropes after stripping down to his underwear? It had to have been 97 or 98. Because I remember Flair was doing some great promo work during that time. Just a total loon bat. One of the all-time greats. Then we came back for a Nikita Dusty promo. This was kind of centered around Dusty giving his response to what transpired with Murdoch. First, though, Nikita commented on the matter, talked about Flair and saying that buying the luxury lifestyle doesn't make him a man, and neither does buying friendship. When it comes to Murdoch, something Dusty taught Nikita very early on is that you cannot buy friendship. When Ivan brought Nikita to America, he taught him to hate and despise everything the American value system stood for, And now that Murdoch has chosen his fate, he's going to pay the full price. Nikita knows who his friends are, and Murdoch chose the wrong side. And for Dusty, here's what he has to say about the matter. For 7 years, he and Murdoch traveled the roads together. In 1974, they both chose their separate paths. Took Dusty to 3 world championship reigns and multiple title matches. And for Murdoch, it took him to Japan. He wants Murdoch to know that we can etch in stone that if it's the last thing Dusty does in his wrestling career, he's going to make sure he sends Murdoch off to Japan, never to return again, Daddy. He's nothing but a yellow egg-sucking dog. He's jealous, he's bitter, and if he ever gets in Dusty's face again, if he ever gets into an altercation with him, he's going to pay. So let it be known, the big takeaway from all this, Dusty Rhodes, circa 1987, throwing shade at those Japanese promotions. And from there, right before cutting back to the ring, out comes Jimmy Cornette and Big Bubba to introduce the Midnights for their next match. Also being sure to put over the upcoming cage showdown between Bubba and Dusty in Pittsburgh on the 27th. Can't ever forget about that card. So Bobby and Dennis wrestled Ricky Sullivan and Larry Stevens. Cornette, I believe, for the second week in a row, ribbing Stevens by referring to him as Darren. And actually, I'll just go ahead and read what I wrote down verbatim because this is pretty much all there was to it. Cornette talks about the conspiracy of last year's Crockett Cup tournament, where they got demolished by the Road Warriors. Bobby Eaton nearly clips his head off the lighting rig doing a diving knee drop. Cornette still hates Ronnie Garvin. More toying with the job guys. Dennis wins with the best brainbuster of all time. I think I about covered it all there. And then we came back from the break with Jimmy Valiant trying to bum $100 off of Tony Schiavone. I believe we were intended to think this was out of kayfabe, because I think for the first time in my life, I actually heard Valiant act like a normal human being for more than 3 seconds on camera. And as soon as Tony alerts Valiant to the fact that they are live, it's right back to handsome Jimmy mode. And he's going off on his usual weird antics, mentioning that he's very excited that the mayor of Mempho gave him the keys to the city of Nashville. And while I don't really know what that means, I think that was coded language for him saying, I have no idea where the fuck I'm going with this promo or what I'm attempting to get at, but somehow, some way, we're going to get to a point. He wound up mentioning something about how he's looking for a partner in the Crockett Cup, even if he has to choose Big Mama or Tony Maroney as a partner, at which point I was half expecting Big Mama to make a cameo on the show so she could talk about how she's been looking for a handsome Jimmy in cars, she's been looking in bars, that whole gamut. Still a legendary all-time train wreck moment. I think I would have been more captivated by the idea of handsome Jimmy and Tony Schiavone as one of the 24 seeds in the 1987 Crockett Cup. Could you have imagined? That would have been a great tag team. Surely it would have been better than Ivan Koloff and Vladimir Pietrov, which is why they had to throw Dick Murdoch in there to spice things up a bit. So they all wrestled a 6-man against Alan Martin, Randy Mulkey, and Chance McQuaid. And this very quickly turned into a Pier 6 brawl. The heels just went in there and started pounding away with all the job guys, beating them around the studio up to and including near the interview podium. And while this chaotic street fight is going on, Murdoch somehow pinned Mulkey with a brainbuster, even though I don't believe there was ever a bell to officially start the match. And kind of all there was to that segment. Although I can say this pretty confidently, As random as the Murdoch heel swerve ended up being, I am already 10 times more intrigued to see him as a heel rather than a babyface. At least now he has somewhat of a story direction. So, for where we are right now, I give the random Captain Redneck heel turn a thumbs up. I also give Jim Cornette's pink dress shoes a thumbs up. Hideously bad, but they fit so perfect with the bad gimmick. So, now the Midnights are out again. Corny's wishing everybody a happy Valentine's Day. But more importantly, he's here to ensure us that on the 27th of February in Pittsburgh, when Dusty steps into the cage with Big Bubba Rogers, Bubba's going to make sure he walks out with $100,000. He's going to mash Dusty into coleslaw and dispose of him like white trash. And he wants Jim Crockett to be sitting at ringside with the check in hand so that he can personally deliver it to Corny by the time the night's over. And, well, just to give everybody a little taste of what Bubba's going to do to Dusty, while Ian and Condrey hit the showers, Bubba's going to go in there and make an example out of some dudes. Specifically, George South. Poor guy got the short end of the stick again, didn't he? Big Bubba, in what I believe was his first televised singles match on the Superstation. I mean, he's definitely had some singles matches on the other shows. He wrestled Ron Garvin at Starrcade 86 in a singles match. But to my recollection, most of his TBS Superstation matches have been six-mans with Eaton and Condrey. But here, it was just Bubba working on his own. Now, naturally, they threw George South in there as the dance partner for Bubba because they knew South was a good worker and he could feed well for him. So, South goes in there. He bumps off of Bubba's body for a few minutes. Bubba no-sells everything and barely budges for any offense. Bubba threw him around for a while, picked him up and slammed him a couple times, and finally put him away with the Bubba Sidewalk Slam. It was mildly less enjoyable because of the fact that they methodically put somebody in there who actually knew how to work. I think it would have been a million times better if they would have put one of the green job guys in there. Better yet, they could have just booked him against Bill Mulkey as a rib. That would have been great. Big Bubba versus Bill Mulkey. Maybe we'll see it. Who knows? Got plenty of Crockett shows left to review, so maybe they'll throw us a bone there at some point. Coming back, though, we had Paul Jones, Rick Rude, and Manny Fernandez out. Paul Jones said words. That's literally all I got out of it. Something about them being the World Tag Team Champions. Something about the Rock and Roll Express wanting cage matches with Rude and Bull for some reason. I have no idea what he was going on about. Rude talked about the Crockett Cup, said that he and Bull might not even show up at the tournament because they're already the champions, so they have nothing left to prove. Write that one down. And then Bull said something about how the R&R connection leg it hot. This was, bluntly put, a completely pointless promo segment. Then we had the Kansas Jayhawks beating Vernon Deaton and Keith Vincent in short order. During the early portion of this match, Tony Schiavone brought to our attention the fact that it was in September of 1986 when the Kansas Jayhawks first showed up, and they were the finalists in the United States Tag Team Championship Tournament. To which I noted, so they've been around for essentially 5 months in Crockett Promotions doing jack shit, by and large. A couple of promos, a couple of TV squashes here and there. Beyond that, just two dudes that exist on the show right now. I think at one point, Tony actually tried to infer that Dutch and Jaggers have been quite successful since they arrived in the NWA. That was a bold-faced lie. They wrestled for a while. I think I fell asleep. Dutch and Jaggers won with something. Then we came back to the booth for an interview with Jimmy Garvin and Precious, where Garvin informed us that he wanted to come out here and talk about all his great accomplishments, put himself over, But there's something eating away at him that's preventing him from coming out here and talking about how great of a wrestler he is. He wants to talk about it, but the thought came over him earlier in the day, on Valentine's Day of all times, that Gorgeous Jimmy actually thought about retiring. There's just no competition left for him in the NWA. Everybody's inferior to him. There's no one left to wrestle at this point. However, Garvin retiring would be the easy way out. So fortunately, he's not going to. Well, that was relieving. But it's good to know that Jimmy Garvin is going to stick around for a little while longer. By the way, if you're sitting there wondering to yourself, was there a point to this promo beyond Jimmy Garvin doing a totally random fake retirement swerve? The answer is no. They just had Garvin go out there to say some stuff, and, well, that was the material he came up with. I'm just going to go out there and do a fake retirement angle on a random episode of Saturday Night on the Superstation. Pretty epic. And for our TV main event, check this one out. Bullet Bob Armstrong versus The Demon. Not the Kiss Demon from the Nitro days. This was an indiscriminate job guy in a lucha mask who they referred to as The Demon. That was their TV main event for this episode. It was not as wacky as when Ron Garvin wrestled the Grim Reaper, but it's still funny to think, of all guys to have Bullet Bob wrestle on TBS, let's have him wrestle The Demon. I was half expecting them to do an angle afterwards where the Demon unmasks as like Bill Dundee or something, but no. They just had Bullet Bob work a match with him for a few minutes. He won with the second rope elbow drop, and that was it. After which they cut to David and Tony recapping the main story of the Dick Murdoch heel turn. And really, when you go back and look at this one, you can kind of chalk this show up to being a one-theme program. The Captain Redneck Russian affiliate story was the big takeaway. Leave that out. The rest of the show was just sort of the standard promo squash formula. It did leave a lot to be desired, especially factoring in how good last week's TV special was when they were taking us around the country and showing us all the house show matches with the top guys. And then a week later, here they are back on the Superstation, and it's kind of being centered around a Dick Murdoch heel swerve and the regular boring squashes. Yeah, like it wasn't a bad show or anything, but definitely a notch or two down from the previous week. Still, even a subpar episode of TBS Wrestling on the Saturday Night Superstation is far and above better than a lot of what we get today. And, people are going to throw rocks at me for always drawing that comparison, but there's a reason I do these classic reviews on the channel, man. Just to sort of demonstrate the shift in the landscape of the wrestling business, how things used to operate compared to how they do now. And that really becomes apparent when you break down the promo material alone. Not every promo on these NWA shows are home runs, but really goes to show, even when guys don't have a lot of time to pre-plan their material or they're just shooting from the hip in a lot of cases, they can still put out better promo delivery than most of the boys in today's business, some of which look like they're damn near ready to shit their pants whenever somebody puts a live mic in front of them. It's sad. In a lot of ways, the way guys are trained in the business today, you just don't get that same perspective. But let's not stay on a dour note. Talk about some world-class championship wrestling, with funky, distorted audio included. Or at least that's the way it sounded through my Raycons. But Maybe that was just me forgetting to clean out the earwax. In any case, on a more serious note, this was the 1 week removed from them recognizing David Von Erich's passing on television. They had aired a tape delay VTR with Bill Mercer announcing the tragic passing right before the close of last week's show. And, while we spent a few minutes covering the way the show was formatted and how they constructed everything around David's death, I think it's more important for everybody watching to take the time to go back and watch our show we did 2 weeks ago where we broke down everything in detail. It was a difficult conversation to have, but I think it warranted a lengthy discussion. Getting the chance to cover the fallout from what happened afterwards, all the what-if scenarios regarding what would have led up to David possibly winning the NWA World Championship, the circumstances around it, had everything gone according to plan. Again, something we're not going to delve into now because we've already covered it pretty extensively, but there was a show that we did 2 weeks ago where there wasn't an episode of World Class to review, so we kind of dedicated the last half of the podcast to talking about David and going into a discussion about the whole David Von Erich story in World Class. So if you have some time, I'd recommend going out of your way to check that out. And, while we're still sort of in the mourning phase on the February 18th edition, it was still treated as a moderately standard episode of Dallas TV. By that, I mean the matches were still very basic and not all that exciting, by and large. Take the opener as an example. It's The Missing Link going up against Mike Reed, who was substituting for George Weingroff on this show, who could not make the tapings due to travel issues. And I should more accurately point out here, according to Mark Lorenz's ring intros, this was not just Mike Reed. This was, quote, equally capable Mike Reed. Because he had to alert us that Mike Reed was a suitable replacement for George Weingroff. And it actually sucks that Weingroff wasn't able to make the show, because I had totally forgotten all about George Weingroff until I heard the name. If you're not privy to your Mid-South tapes, that's at least where I first caught wind of him when I was going back and watching all the mid to late 83 tapes. Now, he was mostly used as an underneath guy in the territory, but here's a cool little caveat about George Weingroff that kind of carried over through the majority of his wrestling career. I believe he was either partially blind in one eye or both eyes, but he still wound up having a moderately successful ring career despite the handicap. And it was always impressive watching him work because he always looked like such a natural in the ring too. Like I said, he wasn't here to work the match, but it would have been an interesting visual to see a blind man try to go in there and wrestle a green guy with 2 left feet. Oh my God. The Missing Link, dude. That name is forever etched in my memory for all the wrong reasons. And I still don't care how much of a strange apparition the guy was. Ain't nothing strange about his crummy wrestling ability. The only thing I noted here was the camera glitch right at the tail end where Missing Link went to pick up Mike Reed for something resembling what appeared to be a powerbomb. The only thing we saw was Link holding Reed upside down. Time froze for approximately 10 seconds. And the only thing I could think was, oh God, please tell me he did not drop this poor fucker on top of his head and kill him. Well, you'll be happy to hear Mike Reed was at least moving his limbs by the time Link went to cover him. So, I presume he was still alive. Talk about an opportune time for the camera to malfunction, though. But, yeah, really didn't get much out of that. Then we came back to hear the Freebirds mouth off. That was verbatim what the graphic said before they cut the commercial. They indeed mouthed off about some stuff here. Terry Gordy, he was in rare form during this interview where he was just being totally wacky and making faces at the camera, totally jacking off and not even trying to hide it. And of course, people will immediately say, oh, okay, so it's fun when Terry Gordy's goofing off in front of the camera, but it's not fun when anybody from AEW does it, right? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. You gonna try and pick a fight with Terry motherfucking Gordy? Goofing off or not, that guy could still twist you into a pretzel like it's nothing. So if Gordy wants to be wacky and not give a fuck, I ain't gonna confront him about it. Mercer's trying to ask him if he had anything to do with the attack on Kevin Von Erich, which was one of the main stories on last week's show. The Freebirds had come back to Texas to defend the 6-man tag team championships. In less than 2 weeks back, the Von Erichs are getting jumped behind the scenes by unseen forces. Oh, wonder who those unseen forces may have been. And of course, Gordy denies it, says that he can't help it if people from Texas don't like Kevin. And all Mercer is doing is insinuating that Gordy's a bully. And we all know that Terry Gordy doesn't like bullies. So, as I go to replay the tape of Kevin running out during the 6-man main event last week, he's obviously still bloody and battered when he ran out at the end. Michael Hayes is denying that he had anything to do with the attack. But isn't it fitting of Texans to try and sit there and blame the Freebirds for attacking Kevin? And right as they cut to Buddy Roberts for input, also noting the very observable camera cut from Hayes. He must have gone on pretty long during his promo, so they had to shave it for time. But as Mercer's trying to figure out why Buddy did not wrestle David in last week's main event when he was supposed to, well, the answer was, I didn't really feel like it. That was essentially what we got. I think Gordy interjected by asking, what are you, a cop? Which I laughed at. And, well, this was indeed a Freebirds promo, justifying everything they did to the Von Erichs, being total dicks, and proving why in about 10 years from this point, wrestling psychology got totally fucked up when it became cool to cheer all the bad guys. I especially liked Hayes' comment to Mercer at the end where he told him, hey Mercer, I liked your suit. Wear it for another 10 years. Maybe it'll be in style by then. And again, I know I say this in my early 30s, the idea of cheering heels and booing babyfaces becoming the norm in latter years of wrestling, and how it was kind of easy to see all this coming if you look back with fresh eyes. But it's like, Gordy, Hayes, and Roberts were so entertaining as douchey heels. How could you not wind up cheering them? I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a dick, so I tend to have a darker sense of humor, and the heels always got over with me more than the baby faces in wrestling, but still, these guys were so great. So at this point, we had some south of the border sponsored wrestling. Perro Guayo wrestled Fishman, who I have confirmed is of no relation to Shark Boy. Although I think it would have been a great rib if TNA were actually smart enough to play that up. Shark Boy being the cousin of the Fishman. But that would have also implied that anybody in that company knew who the fuck Fishman was. Good luck with that. Wrestling was fine. I kind of got distracted by hearing Bill Mercer announce that Hacksaw Butch Reed was coming to World Class shortly. Which again, took me back to my Mid-South tape memories. At this point, he was apparently the North American champion in the territory, which I believe was still around the point where they had that raggedy beaten up belt. Telling you, when you have some free time, go out of your way to look up pictures of that old North American title in Mid-South if you want a reference for how unkempt that title looked at one point. Like back from the early 80s before Magnum TA won it and they did a whole makeover of it. It was in rough shape. But still, even even a crappy-looking Mid-South World title, it was still a great time to be a wrestling fan. Anyway, Guayo ended up going over with a backsplash from the middle rope. Like I said, it was fine, just kind of a match that existed. I'd be lying to you if I said I knew anything about Perro Aguayo or his work in Mexico. A little out of my wheelhouse of narrow expertise. Coming back, though, we had Mike Von Erich versus Buddy Roberts, which got off hot with a jump start. And when you factor in that the Freebirds just got done beating the shit out of Mike's brothers with a leather cowboy boot the previous week, you can probably imagine why Mikey went into this not too pleased. I'd more accurately say this one started off hot with a babyface flurry from Mike, and by the end, it turned into just kind of a match. MJF would probably coin it as mid. I'll say this, though. Despite everything I mentioned about Mike Von Erich's run in world class, comparing him to his brothers, crowd was still hot for him here. He actually had a really impressive head scissor takeover at one point where he pulled Buddy all the way over the top rope from the ring apron. It looked so fluid with the way he pulled it off. I have no idea how he did that. And they did the nice flash roll-up at the end where Buddy tried to charge Mike in the corner, but Mike sidestepped him and schoolboy cradled Buddy for the pin. Again, Mike had some upside qualities. He was never going to be on David, Kerry, or Kevin's level as an overall package, but he was a good seller. The wrestling was always solid from him, and he definitely pulled off the underdog role in his matches very well. I mean, he was the smallest of all the brothers, so he could definitely get over in that department. I don't want to make it always seem like I'm trying to bury Mike here on these world-class reviews or say that he was the shits or anything. It was just the problem that his brothers were on such an elite level above him. Kind of just weighs Mike down by comparison. But, at least they gave Mike a little bit of revenge over the Freebirds from last week. Coming to our main event, though, this is what the show was entirely built around. They gave plenty of time for this one, and it was absolutely warranted. It's Ric Flair making a rare Dallas appearance to defend the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Gentleman Chris Adams. And this was honestly one of those matches where I got so immersed in the action from start to finish. My note-taking was very sparse. I mean, you all obviously know what kind of worker Ric Flair was. That I don't think it needs to be restated here. Chris Adams, great athlete himself. So if you just picture in your mind what Chris Adams versus Ric Flair looks like on paper, you can safely assume it was a very high-quality title match. Now, keep in mind, this is 1984 Ric Flair, so you will note that the Flair bumps in this match were more low-key than, say, 1986 or even 1987 Ric Flair bumps. I might have mentioned this before, but it is interesting sort of cross-examining a 3 years difference with the kind of worker Flair was in the territories between, 1982, 83, 84, and then from, 1986 and 87, so on. Because it's still the same guy. It's the Nature Boy, but this was well before Flair was doing all the crazy lunatic promos and the overselling that we all came to know and love him for. It's kind of sad here, too. At one point, Mercer was drawing attention to David's series of matches that he's already had with Flair for the world title, all the indecisive finishes they had, so he was alluding to the idea of David getting a fair opportunity to go up against Ric Flair for the title rematch. I mean, you can tell this is obviously taped before David's unfortunate passing. But this is a great match, man. It was a total Ric Flair match. He was going to give Chris Adams ample time to work him over and give him all kinds of offense. Even so, Flair did all of his usual cutoff tactics so he could work over Adams. Crowd was into everything they did from beginning to end, especially the near falls. Again, you take into account it's a Ric Flair match, so They're going to go a while. Adams in particular was really getting pushed to the max with his cardio level. Flair was selling the fatigue, but I guarantee you he probably barely broke a sweat. This was like a warm-up level cardio at the gym for Ric Flair. And the finish was great with Adams milking the big comeback, trying to go up top to hit a diving crossbody off the middle rope, but Flair rolls that through and covers Adams for the surprise pin. Clean, which the fans did not take too kindly to. He didn't even grab a handful of tights. But, man, these guys worked their asses off. Great title main event. It's always good seeing Flair work in Dallas. And see, this is the kind of thing I talk about when I say world champions should feel like special attractions in wrestling. Flair was the perfect embodiment of that during this period. When you saw Ric Flair work a match, you knew it was a big deal. He always came off like a special attraction on TV. And especially for the rare times we saw him work the Dallas region, it always showed with the way he was presented on television. Like, for moderate comparisons, Roman Reigns would kind of fall into that category today, especially with the way he's booked on WWE. But man, as much as I love Roman, even I'm not going to try to make an argument that he's on Flair's level of stardom. Which again, goes to show the sorry state of where we are in today's business when Roman Reigns, arguably WWE's top star at the moment, nowhere close to Ric Flair's level. Not even in the same stratosphere, dude. Just more textbook examples of why I highly encourage all of you to get that subscription to the Cock so you can actually see these classic shows in real time, and don't take my word for it. I'm just reporting on what I see. Even if the wrestling isn't your flavor, just for the visual of seeing actual big names, actual stars in wrestling, watching during a period when the fans were emotionally invested in everything that was going on, at least for that, I consider it well worth the monthly subscription. Like what, $10 I think I pay? Now there's different services. You can pay more if you want like all access streaming, but to me it's not worth it. I mean, I get no other use out of Peacock aside from the wrestling content. I mean, all the other shows are horse shit anyway, but it's still worth the investment just so you can go back and see these old tape libraries. It's a lot of fun getting to relive this classic content. And again, I talked about it before, especially with the world-class shows. A lot of it I'm seeing for the first time ever. It's such a good counterbalance to what we see with the SmackDown and Dynamite reports. Because, man, if this entire channel was solely dedicated to modern content, well, trust me, I mean, if you've been following this channel for well over a year, you've seen the wrestling we've cycled in and out. I tried the NXT 2.0 experiment. That sucked a cock. Rampage quickly became a laughing joke, and it still is. Nobody talks about that show anymore, and why would you? Nothing of substance ever happens on it. NWA Power is a total farce. Raw's been completely worthless for years now. I can barely tolerate Dynamite and SmackDown most weeks. And, for the sake of the channel, it probably garners a good bit of traffic. So it's probably befitting of me to actually include it, because if I only did classic content, I might not gain as much viewership. So I go where the traffic is. But I think it's equally as important for me to get that stuff in here so I can actually cover enjoyable wrestling. Stuff that's actually educational and brings back memories of when this shit was actually valued as serious. I mean, I know I'm not an expert at this, but I've watched a lot of wrestling in my life, man. I've seen the good, I've seen the bad. You just don't get wrestling like this anymore. It's a sorry state of affairs, but it is where we are. All right, squeaky chair and all, we're going to end things out here by me doing a brief overview of what's coming up on Saturday, which is tomorrow. The Elimination Chamber Premium Live Special, because we do not call them pay-per-views anymore. All right, so I'm going to go to the wiki page. I'm going to see what we've got going on here. Now, it is important to know, I don't watch Raw, So looking at this card now, it looks like there are a couple of these matches that I really wasn't keeping tabs on because I don't watch the Monday show. So we will run down what is currently being advertised. I can't specify whether or not this is the full card, but here's what they have announced. So we have 2 Elimination Chamber matches, which, again, I've already kind of gone on my rant about how much I hate the concept of them taking a gimmick match and then making it its own special pay-per-view instead of doing this like as a once-in-the-year attraction match, like a Survivor Series or something, which I think was what the Elimination Chamber used to be. But anyway, we'll talk about it in a minute. But one of them is an Elimination Chamber match for the United States title. Austin Theory, the current champion, is defending against Seth freaking Rollins, Johnny Gargano, Bronson Reed, Damian Priest, and Montez Ford, which kind of just seems like a random conglomeration of dudes. Again, I don't watch the Monday show, so maybe these guys have all been feuding in some capacity, but I don't know. I would expect Theory to retain the belt, but again, I haven't been really keeping up with what he's been doing, so it's hard to say. Rollins was teasing the thing with Logan Paul after the Rumble, so it's highly unlikely he wins the title. The other guys just kind of seem like placeholder for me. So I see no reason for why they would take the belt off of Theory at this point, but I guess we'll find out. I will be interested to see if they factor Theory into a big program for WrestleMania. I mean, he was a huge part of last year's event, so I'd hate to see 1 year later for him not to be involved in something big, but we'll see what they do. Then, of course, we got to talk about the girls' chamber match, because we do live in the equality era of pro wrestling. Almost threw up in my mouth just saying the term, but I'm not even going to get into that now. So the Elimination Chamber match for the Raw Women's title. Or is it the Raw Women's title? Who's the Raw Women's champion? Doesn't specify. Elimination Chamber match for a... Oh, I see. Okay, so here's how they have it notated. The Elimination Chamber match for a WWE Raw Women's Championship match at WrestleMania. Okay, so it's a number 1 contenders match. Got it. All right, so we got Asuka, Liv Morgan, Nikki Cross, Raquel Rodriguez, Hernandez, Gomez III, Natalia, and Carmella. Holy fuck, that sounds lousy. Oh my God. I might use that as my designated piss break, because I'm going to need something on this show to cleanse my palate. So I might just walk out of the room while that's going on. I mean, with the names listed here, I don't think it's going to be any good. So, whatever. I think the Raw champion, or the Raw Women's champion, is Bianca, right? So, take your pick. I mean, out of these girls, who do you want to see get the title shot? Isn't it kind of obvious that Asuka's going over? The other 5 girls are, again, just kind of there to fill the void. I mean, Asuka came back at the Rumble. She got a pretty big ovation. But why the hell isn't Becky Lynch being factored into any of this? Hold on a second. Okay, so the SmackDown Women's title match for WrestleMania, we know that. That's Rhea Ripley and Charlotte. They've already set that up. What the hell are they doing with Becky Lynch? She's not being factored into the equation right now. Did she lose one of the qualifying matches that took her out of this match? Okay. Don't really know what's going on there. Guess we'll find out. Again, I mean, I presume Asuka's going over, but they ain't really leaving a lot of room for leeway there. All right, I'm going to skip over the next match for a second because I kind of want to cover that last. We have a mixed tag match with Edge and Beth Phoenix wrestling Finn Balor and Rhea Ripley, with Damian and Dominic appearing at ringside. I don't know. Again, this has been built up on Raw, so I don't really have much to comment on with it. Actually, looking at this now, I think every single match except for the main event has been advertised on Raw. Well, Edge and Beth, I mean, we know they were kind of doing the thing at the Rumble, so I guess this kind of makes sense. Should be good. I mean, Rhea's getting the title match at WrestleMania, so I can't imagine they don't put them over. It kind of seems like a waste of Edge and Beth Phoenix as a team, but that's another oddball scenario where they're approaching WrestleMania season and I don't really know what they've got going on for Edge. I mean, he's still kind of being factored into the whole Judgment Day thing, which I've already talked about ad nauseum. I've kind of been over this feud for a long time now, but hopefully they have something a little bigger in store for him. Guess we'll see what they do, though. We also have Bobby Lashley and Brock Lesnar, which kind of seems like just a way for them to buy time so they can get Brock ready to face Gunther at WrestleMania. I mean, that's sort of the vibe I'm getting. Lashley's kind of been directionless for a long time now, and the Brock Lesnar program really hasn't hit home for me. Like, I remember they did the title match last year, and it was an okay match, but wasn't great or anything like that. Then they had that match in Saudi Arabia, which really was a total nothing burger. So what, is this the rubber match then? I mean, again, I expect Brock to go over because I have to figure they have him factored into something for WrestleMania. Lashley, I don't know. He might just kind of whittle out of the picture altogether. He's kind of been a lost cause as far as I'm concerned. Really dropped the ball with him. But that's kind of what I'm taking away from that. Could be a good match, but again, I mentioned this before with Brock too. I've sort of been over that whole thing for a long time. He does the same match every time. It's nothing new. So, I don't know. It'll be a spectacle, but we'll see what they do. But as far as the Universal Championship match, Roman Reigns versus Sami Zayn. This one's got a lot of people talking, and I mean, I really did a deep dive analysis on my SmackDown review talking about where I think this should go, the possibilities of how they book the finish, and how they could go several different ways with it. But at this point, I think it's a universal agreement that with the way they've been booking this program, with the popularity and the traction Sammy's been gaining, they can't beat him, right? I mean, it'd almost be stupid to do so. Sami Zayn is white hot right now. I mean, I can make an argument that he's more over than Cody, as a babyface especially. They've been doing some great stuff with Sami, doing promo exchanges with Cody and Heyman. I don't know, dude. I'm thinking they might be going the three-way route. And again, I've talked about how I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. Wouldn't be my first option, but at least in this scenario, it would be a case where it would make sense to do the three-way. It always kind of seems like a cop-out in most cases, but not in this circumstance. I think there's a valid argument to be had that maybe Roman and Cody in the singles match, without Sami involved in any way, it might work against them. They might need to factor Sami into that match, which basically calls into question, how do they book this finish? Do they do a DQ? Do they do a countout? Do they do a no finish? Do they have Roman go over by nefarious means, but still try to find a way to give Sami an outing? I don't know, man. That's a tough one. Do they get somebody from the bloodline involved? Does Cody make an appearance? Again, it's a very interesting scenario because there are multiple ways they could go with this, and it doesn't necessarily mean one way is wrong versus the other. I I mean, I put a lot of thought into it. I've speculated on what I think would be the best possible outcome for them to do. To tell you the truth, I might make an argument that maybe the DQ finish would make sense. I mean, they could do it a couple different ways. Maybe Sammy's the one that just kind of gets fed up with Roman's antics, and maybe he ends up using a chair and the ref sees him so they can DQ Sammy, but they still kind of set up that he has an outing for a title rematch. Maybe Roman goes over via DQ, so Sammy is automatically going to be factored into the WrestleMania rematch. Like I said, I don't think there's a wrong way to do it, with the exception of one outcome. There's one way where I think they could fuck this up, and it might not wind up serving them well in the process. If they just have Roman go over Sammy, whether it's through nefarious means or just clean, if they pin Sami Zayn in this match, I don't like those odds. Again, the fan reception is going to be the key factor in all this. Cody's hot right now. People do want to see Roman and Cody at WrestleMania, but you can't really leave Sammy out of the equation, at least with the way this has all been going on television. And if they beat Sammy here and then they just kind of wind up going a completely different direction creatively for him, like say they even do something like have Jey Uso swerve him and maybe Jey Uso sort of pledges his allegiance to Roman again, because they've been kind of toying that he's on the fence with whether or not he's in or out of the bloodline. So maybe they do this as an excuse where Jey actually sides with Jimmy and he screws over Sammy, and then that sets up the Usos defending the belts against Owens and Zayn at WrestleMania. The other thing you have to keep in mind, too, they're going to be in Montreal for the show, so Kevin Owens is bound to make a cameo appearance at some point as well. Maybe Kevin gets involved, and that is the way they go about setting up the tag title feud. And again, I wouldn't be opposed to the tag title match, but people have said it's a bit of a downgrade, and maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. It's hard to say. I mean, because the Usos have got to do something at WrestleMania too, and Sammy and Kevin had that eternal bond together. Would the people necessarily poo-poo the idea of Owens and Zayn winning the tag titles? I don't know. Perhaps. I mean, I think it would be odd for them to factor Sammy into both. Like, maybe night one they do the tag title match, and then the next night they do the three-way where Sammy ends up winning the Universal title, so then he's a dual champion. You get a hell of a babyface pop, but that kind of leaves Cody to piss on the wind. So, I don't know, man. There's a laundry list of things they could do, but out of the entire card right now with the 5 matches they have advertised, the Universal title match is the one I'm most looking forward to. The other 4 are just kind of there. So, I contemplated whether or not it was even worth doing the card preview, but I figured it's the day before. Maybe this will get a little bit of viewership beforehand. So, we'll see if my predictions are off base in any way. I mean, I don't know. WrestleMania is shaping up to be a very, very interesting show this year. I still don't like the idea that it's a 2-night event, but I mean, they're just going to kind of keep running with this model for, well, however long. Until they finally realize that they're not getting any return on the investment, or tickets are not selling, which has also been a problem for them in recent times. But anyway, we'll kind of wrap this long show up, and I will be back with you on Monday. We will be doing the Retro Raw report. We'll be doing the Elimination Chamber review. SmackDown, I might touch on a couple talking points. You know, there are a couple things that are going on that don't really tie into the actual special events, so we might cover them. Won't spend a whole lot of time talking about it, but we'll at least acknowledge it. So we'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching, and thanks for bearing with me for another long trudge. Sorry if I peaked the mic. Take care, all. Peace out.